So I'm Craig O'Hare, and I guess I'm kicking off H2 365 here in New Mexico, so it's an honor to do that. And thanks for joining me and joining this particular presentation. I think it's fairly timely this year. And the title of my presentation is Boost Your Mental Health Immune System, Staying Healthy and Hopefully Happy During COVID-19. So when I hit page down, it's not page downing. There we go. Okay, so there we go. Just a little bit about me. I'm retired from a career in government for city, county, and state. I worked in environmental sustainability most of my career, worked for Governor Richardson in the state energy department, promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency, and was fortunate to retire in 2016 and decided that in retirement I wanted to focus more on helping people who are struggling with behavioral health issues. I myself am a 25-year survivor of periodic bouts of depression. Sometimes they've been mild and manageable, and I've had a few that are pretty darn awful and scary, and I'm grateful that I've made it through it and was able to deal with that. While I'm not a licensed therapist in any form, I am a certified peer support worker. I presume many of you know what that is. It's a 1-week training and then a CEU requirement for people who are in recovery from mental illness or addictions who work or volunteer in the behavioral health sector. So I got that early last year, that certification. I am on the board of the LifeLink here in Santa Fe. LifeLink is a 32-year nonprofit providing homeless and mental health and addiction, and I think we have the only victims of human trafficking services program in our state, and it's looked at as a model around the country. I'm on the board of the National Alliance on Mental Illness Santa Fe chapter, and also on a behavioral health management team that Santa Fe County has. Santa Fe County, thankfully, has been really aggressive in addressing behavioral health issues in our county. And then I'm a volunteer with Breaking the Silence. Some of you may be aware of Breaking the Silence New Mexico. We take the mental health education to middle and high schools. It's 2 50-minute lesson plans specific to mental health and mental illness. It's a great program. Unfortunately, of course, during COVID, we haven't been able to get back into the school. So before we get started into the meat of my presentation, I wanted to say that this presentation is modified from a little guide I developed a couple of years ago that I called A Survivor's Guide to Depression. And I took my experiences in coping with and dealing with and recovering from depression, and I put it in a little 30-page booklet. And when I got it out there to people who both deal with depression or deal with help people, loved ones that are struggling with depression, I got a lot of feedback that a lot of what I had in the depression guide really was useful to people who don't struggle with clinical depression, but struggle with their mental health, that aren't as happy as they'd like to be, they're disappointed or even sad sometimes. And so I modified or broadened the message back in May when I gave this presentation to really focus on thinking about having a mental health immune system, just like we talk about, particularly during COVID, having a physical health immune system. And that this mental health immune system can be nurtured and supported in a way that when we deal with stresses and when we deal with hardships, we're more resilient emotionally to deal with those. I do want to emphasize that I in no way have all the answers on this. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing when it comes to mental health and mental illness. And so I just want to emphasize that there are certain things you may relate to about what I'm presenting, and that's great, and other things you may not relate to at all. If you or someone you know or any of your student clients, of course, are dealing with a mental illness or you feel they may be, obviously make sure you or they see a mental health professional. One of my favorite sayings is take what works for you and leave the rest. It's kind of my mantra in life. It seems like in life, a lot of times we focus on what we don't agree with or what upsets us or what pisses us off or whatever. And I like to flip that on its head and say, I'm going to focus on what works for me and the things that I can relate to and can kind of support and do something with, and I'll just let go of the rest. And that's okay. A little word about alcoholism and addictions and even moderate usage of drugs and alcohol. I don't specifically address that in this presentation, but I think it's important to recognize that they may compromise your happiness and your mental health, and it's worth being aware of and thinking about if you're struggling with your own mental health. I do want to emphasize with my suggestions and hopefully helpful tips to stay COVID compliant. We're still under, of course, quite a bit of COVID restrictions, even though they're being slowly relaxed thanks to some nice reduction in numbers in the last 3 weeks or so. Everything I'm suggesting is not to suggest that you violate any of the COVID compliance measures. And if you are immune compromised, obviously you need to take extra precautions, more so than a person who's not immune compromised. So they're pretty basic because my presentation is pretty basic. One is understand the 4 principles of connection and how they relate to positive mental health and overall happiness. I basically developed this notion of the 4 principles of connection, and be curious to see how you react to it. Second learning objective is identify 2 to 3 specific strategies or actions for each of those 4 principles to maintain your emotional health. Or 3, recognize the specific stresses that COVID is putting on our mental health and ways to mitigate that stress. And then I added what I hope is a personal objective for all of you, and that is commit to proactively maintaining your mental health system. Actually take it on as a little bit of a mission in your life going forward, that it's important to do certain things, to make a point of doing certain things, to hopefully be as emotionally resilient and happy as possible, and hold any notion of sliding into the potential for a mental illness at bay. So now it's time for an Insta poll. These polls are all anonymous. So the first question is, the first poll is, to what extent do you feel the realities of COVID-19 have compromised your mental health, your happiness, your sense of well-being? Not at all, somewhat, quite a bit, or substantially.
Leave it for a couple more seconds.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. I'm actually a little bit relieved with these results. I'm really glad that 51% only said somewhat. I think that's encouraging. I'm concerned about over a third, 36%, saying quite a bit. And for those 1 in 10, 11% that said substantially, I feel for you. It's a challenge in a lot of ways, both at home and professionally. And these are interesting results. We have basically 47%, nearly half said quite a bit or substantially. That was interesting. Okay, thank you for your responses. Now my screen seems locked up. There we go. Okay. So this is my own creation, I have to admit, the Foundation for Positive Mental Health, Establishing and Maintaining Connection. And some of the research I've done, and I've done a lot of research and reading around behavioral health and strategies and options for maintaining one's mental health, I really kept reading about connection, the fact that a lot of mental illnesses are a result of the opposite, of disconnection, that we're disconnected with life, that we're not connected with the really important aspects of what allows us to be emotionally grounded, if you will, in life, because we've become disconnected in a lot of different ways. And so these four connections, if you will, are connection with yourself, connection with others, connection with nature, and then having some form of spiritual connection. So on staying connected to yourself, this is kind of a bizarre concept for many. It was for me until I kind of came to grips with it in the last 10 years. But this is really about being at peace with, and not just loving, but liking who you are, faults and all. You know, there's a lot of things about probably our lives and our behaviors that we regret or wish we were a little different about. But there's obviously a lot about us that's really good and worthy. And it's really important to basically embrace that you are a unique individual and are worthy just the way you are of love and of happiness. Even if you have things that have gone on in the past in your life or whatever that, you know, you wish you had handled a different way. It's really about you are a worthy person, really just the way you are, and that you have your own suite of qualities and perspectives and abilities that really nobody else has quite the way you do. And that in that sense, we all are individually special. And it's said a lot, and it's a little bit corny, that it's important to treat yourself as you would your own best friend. But unfortunately, we're often the hardest on ourselves. We have those internal voices saying, you know, you're not smart, or you're not good at sports, or you're not worthy. And they're just voices. They're not real, but we tend to believe them. And I think it's important to say, would you be saying those same things that you're saying to yourself to your best friend that you love and care about? And obviously, the answer is probably no. And then I like this, if you remember Stuart Smalley on Saturday Night Live, he was the guy who looked at himself in the mirror and went through this whole self-affirmation exercise where he summed it up with, you know, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. And really, that's really the way you should feel about yourself, that, you know, you are good enough and you are worthy. So connection to others, this is the part that I'm really struggling with during COVID. I'm in retirement, and I don't have all the same options I have, of course, during COVID to get together with people in person and interact with them in person. And so I'm really struggling with not having cabin fever and with this realities of isolation. But we humans are inherently social beings, and we need to interact with and be around other people. And yes, ideally in person. And I'm very grateful for Zoom. I'm very grateful for these online support groups that are out there. They are so much better than not having them at all. But they don't quite replace the energy we get from each other when we're with each other in person. And there are opportunities on a limited basis to get together with others in person, even during the COVID restrictions, that I think it's important to try to take advantage of. You know, our civilized world has become increasingly isolating from each other. And we have these hectic schedules. We're obsessed with our devices and all these emails coming in all the time. And I think it's really made us, you know, quite a bit more disconnected from each other as humans and social. And then I like to focus on this notion of belonging to a social group, that not only is it important to, you know, have people that you get together with, friends and family, and socialize with, but if you're part of any sort of group that gets together for a common purpose, whether it's a church or a Dallas Cowboys, you know, sports group, or hobbies, or a book club, that there's something about belonging to a group and getting together with the same people, you know, once a week or once a month for a common purpose that provides the fellowship that can be really nurturing in a social context. And I like to emphasize that fellowship gets talked a lot about in a church congregation setting, but fellowship can happen really in any group setting when people consistently and periodically get together. Connection to earth and nature. This one is near and dear to my heart. I've been an environmental activist most of my life. And I think this may be the one that most people in our culture are the most disconnected from. Earth is obviously our home. I mean, it's the ultimate source of all life, including our own. Everything we have on this planet, everything we take advantage of, technological-wise or whatever, has come from this planet. And for hundreds of thousands of years of the human species existing, we humans were intricately and intimately tied to nature. I mean, our lives depended on being in touch with nature and hunting and growing food and that sort of thing. And it's really only in the last 100 years or so that we've become mostly indoor beings. With the advent of the automobile and air conditioning and just the way our society has civilized, we're just not outdoors nearly as much as we used to be as a species. And it's created, I think, that disconnection from nature. When we've lost touch with the rhythms and cycles of nature. The sun's movement during the course of the year, the moon cycles. Where are we in the moon cycle now? Probably most people are not that in touch with where the moon is today. Bird singing, growing our own food. There's actually a mental health phrase called nature deficit disorder, which is a real thing. It means that we're just not in touch with Mother Nature, who really it's important for us to be in touch with. And then the Japanese have this really neat phrase, this really neat philosophy actually, called Shinrin Yoku. And Shinrin Yoku literally means forest bathing. And it's a philosophy where they say, if you just get out into a forest, and you don't have to go for a killer hike, it's not about necessarily the exercise, it's about taking in the energy you get from being around a bunch of trees or a stream in nature. That there's something inherently nurturing and positive emotionally in doing that. And then finally, spiritual or religious connection. If you already have a spiritual or religious practice of some sort or another, that's great. Maintain it, hang on to it, enhance it if you can, and you feel inspired to. And it's important to recognize, while respecting those who embraced organized religion, having a spiritual orientation or practice is not necessarily about needing to believe in God or even a higher power. For years and years, frankly decades, I rejected religion and even spirituality for decades. My father, bless his heart, who I love dearly, my parents were divorced at an early age. My father is a very hardcore evangelical Christian, and he was always trying to push that down my throat. And as a result, I ran like heck the other way, frankly, from all religions and spirituality. And it wasn't until 10 years ago when I went to an inpatient program for my depression that I got in touch with my own spirituality, and I realized that my higher power was nature, that the beauty and magic of nature and the diversity of nature was my spirituality. And that made me feel really good that I could latch on to a form of spirituality that I could really relate to and embrace. However, for those that are atheists or otherwise adamantly reject any concept of spirit, no problem. Let that one go. I know that was a rather quick overview of those 4 items, but I just wanted to do a quick Insta poll. And the first question is, which of the following principles of connection do you feel you currently sort of have the best handle on, have a good feeling that you're pretty connected in either the area of yourself, connection with other people, with the natural world, or with spirituality and religion?
Okay, we're just going to leave the poll open for another few seconds and then we'll share the results. So we've got
Okay,
on the screen for you.
are we done, Alicia?
Yeah, we've got the poll results shared on the screen.
So these are some very interesting results. And again, thank you for everyone for participating. The majority of people, it's really interesting, feel like they would like to be better connected with themselves and who they are as a person, I would presume, and feeling better about themselves in their role in their relationships and in their lives. That's interesting. Others, very interesting to me, was the lowest at 11%. I would probably put that as my highest personally. I'm really struggling to stay connected to others right now. Nature, about a quarter said they feel pretty good about their connection with the natural world. That's great. And then just shy of a third, 29%, feel like they're pretty connected spiritually or religiously. That's great too. So now we're going to ask the flip side question, and that is, which of the four principles of connection do you feel you would like to and need to maybe work on that you feel like you might be a little bit deficient in right now?
Okay, we're going to leave this open just for a couple more seconds so everyone make sure and answer, and then I will share those results. And there's the results for the poll.
Fairly good balance, actually, but so we have 31% that would like to focus more on connecting to themselves. I apologize, I actually interpreted the previous poll incorrectly. We had like 33% that felt good about themselves in their connection with themselves. That was good. 18% that would like to focus a little more on connecting more with other people. About 1 in 5, 20% would like to focus a little bit more on nature. And as I'll get into, nature can be just walking into your backyard or taking a walk around your neighborhood. Doesn't have to be going for some big old wilderness hike. And then just about a third would like to focus a little bit more on their spirituality and their religion and enhancing that. That was interesting. Okay, thank you for that. Before I move on, I just want to say, if you have any comments or questions about things that I'm covering or thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat, and Alicia will be compiling them. And then at the end of the session, after my presentation, we're going to have a little Q&A forum for as long as we need to in the hour and a half to deal with your questions or comments or thoughts. Thank you. And why my screen locked up? Okay, I think this is my... Yep. Okay, so one of my themes is basically, you're in charge. We're in charge. Take charge of your mental health. Whether we're just sad or unhappy with our lives, I don't really be meaning to use the word just, or we're dealing with a clinical mental illness like depression. For better or for worse, it's ultimately up to us, in other words, me, to do something about it. And so it's important to feel empowered that we can actually do something about maintaining our mental health and our emotional resiliency, that there's measures we can take to sort of hold sadness or even mental illness at bay if we sort of take a number of measures collectively to create that emotional resiliency. Others will definitely help us with our journey back to mental health and happiness, but we're in charge. I mean, I had a lot of assistance during the times I've had really bad depression. But ultimately, I still had to know and realize that it was up to me to do my best to recover and get better. And it's not easy. So just a little aside with depression, it's really not easy for those who are in the deep, dark throes of depression. And taking charge in that context may mean just little teeny tiny steps, like making your bed or going for a 10-minute walk. In that context of someone with severe clinical depression, that is taking charge. And it's really important for all of us to praise ourselves when we take actions, however small, to increase our probability, if you will, for being healthy and happy. If we're taking positive changes in our lives, even when they're small and don't seem like that big a deal, we really still need to be praising ourselves, patting ourselves in the back, and giving our own selves some kudos that, hey, we are taking charge of this, and we're not just wallowing in our own sadness or whatever, which is pretty easy to do. I certainly have been there, wallowing in my own sadness. So in applying the connection principles, and these are mostly some specific strategies that I found helpful, and I've gotten feedback from others that they've found helpful. And the first is be patient. Positive change takes time, especially when it comes to if you're dealing with a significant mental health challenge. There's no single magic bullet to feel better right away. Not even with an antidepressant. There's no happy pill. It's just important to accept that if we're struggling with our mental health, if we're going through a period of sadness or disappointment, that it probably will take a little while to pull out of it, and that's normal, and that's okay, and things will get better. Second one, I have to remind myself all the time is don't isolate. You do have a choice not to isolate during COVID, although it's much more of a challenge. Obviously, all these Zoom gatherings and support groups are great. My extended family has had family reunions online that have been fun, where we've got family all over the country, and we have a Zoom get-together. The first time we tried a family reunion get-together, no one moderated the session, and there were like 25 of us, and so it was this talking free-for-all that was crazy. It was fun, but nobody could really say anything that anybody could hear. So the next two we've had a moderator. As far as getting together, there are options to get together outside. Obviously now we can go to restaurants and get together, both outdoors and indoors. Personally, I recommend staying outdoors when it comes to socializing with others. You're probably aware that COVID transmission outdoors is extremely lower probability than COVID transmission indoors. And so in my walks with my dog around my neighborhood, I've seen friends visiting each other in their front yards, where a couple has come over to another couple's house, and they're sitting in the front yard socializing 10 or 12 feet away. So there are ways to get together with people in person. I go to the dog park partly for my dog's benefit, but partly for my benefit to run into other people and just talk to them briefly. For those that deal with depression, isolating is extremely common, and it's just important to fight it and not isolate whenever you feel up to it, and recognizing that sometimes someone who's really depressed doesn't feel up to it. This is one of my big messages: is get out of the house. I really appreciate and understand the simple stay home message of COVID, but I do think that in some ways it's unfortunate, because stay home does not have to mean being locked inside your home 24/7 and never going outside. Cabin fever is real. And I'm really concerned about my mom getting cabin fever. She's in a senior living situation here in Santa Fe, in a tiny 400 square foot apartment that she's basically mostly not allowed to leave or see her friends. And cabin fever can lead to PTSD and possibly even depression. So, it's perfectly safe and allowed to go for a walk in your neighborhood. I will highly recommend that you go for a walk without your smartphone. We talk about being present and this whole idea of mindfulness, of trying to be as present in the moment as possible. And I like to think that our devices and our unfortunate obsession with our devices and checking them all the time is the exact opposite of being present. And so if I was to make one recommendation to anybody about maintaining their mental health, I would say try to take 2 at least 20 to 30-minute walks a day around your neighborhood without your smartphone. Leave it back at the house and just try to make it a little bit of a walking meditation where you really just try to focus on being hyper aware and observant of everything around you, your neighbor's yards, the landscaping, the architecture, the ravens squawking at each other in the tree, but try to be as aware and as present as possible. And if you did that twice a day for two 20-minute sessions, I think it would be a really nice benefit, again, without your smartphone. Gardening is a form of getting out of the house and getting outside and hanging out in your backyard. Number 4, this is really important. Be wary of social media. Social media, we can have this tendency on Facebook to compare ourselves to other people posting on Facebook. And on Facebook, everybody's life is awesome. Nobody's posting about they lost their job, or, not nobody, but very few people. People put all their positive stuff on Facebook. Look how popular I am. Look how athletic I am. Look at all these great vacations I'm taking. And if you're struggling in life, mental health wise, by comparison, you can go, boy, my life really is awful. And so really be careful about how you use Facebook. And particularly, and this is a problem that I encounter a lot, is there's a lot of angry, disrespectful discourse on social media. A lot of it political, a lot of the R's and the D's just viciously fighting each other on Facebook. In my opinion, it's really toxic. I found myself engaging sometimes in some of that discourse, and it's just really, really, I know it's unhealthy for me, and I encourage you to avoid it as much as possible. And I do encourage all of us, and I struggle with this, although I do my best to do it. Try to do some social media or even device timeout, where you go a couple hours without even ever looking at your smartphone or your laptop. Obviously not at work, but when you have that liberty. I will say that there's a lot of good connecting that goes on social media. I mean, I stay connected with friends and family in a way on Facebook that I couldn't have before, which is really nice. It just takes a lot of discipline to sort of focus on the nurturing positive applications of Facebook and social media, and to stay away from and not get sucked into the toxic aspect of social media and some of the social discourse that's going on out there. Because I really do think it's really unhealthy and not very positive for our mental state. Online support groups, AA, there's a lot of 12-step support groups out there. An inpatient program that I went to when my depression got really bad has 3 online support groups a day for people who are struggling with their mental health. And so, if you are struggling with your mental health, I would encourage you to try to find an online support group. They're not necessarily formal, structured group therapy. They're just people who are sharing honest things about the struggles that they're having, particularly now during COVID. Number 5 is really important. Limit your news intake. 90+% of news, unfortunately, is negative, whether it's murders or riots or injustice and oppression and wars and what have you. And it's really important to try to minimize how much of that we take in and consume. I used to be a complete news junkie and take in way too much news. And I finally figured out it wasn't healthy for me, and I've downshifted quite a bit. I probably need to downshift more from my news intake. And it's important to stay COVID informed, and the governor does her weekly updates on where we're at and what the restrictions are. But don't overdo it. You don't need to know every blow by blow with the COVID pandemic nightmare that it is. And so try to keep that in check. And consider a news timeout. And also, while I have news on here and the TV, just be careful about watching violent shows, shows that have a lot of dark, violent aspects to them, because they can affect us, I think. 6, get outside. Yes, it's a little redundant with get out of the house, but that's deliberately on purpose. I'm a big believer in ecotherapy. Studies have shown that that if you sit by a body of water like a creek or a river, you get these negative ions that are mood enhancers, and that just getting out in the sun and the fresh air and in the wind can be really healthy for one's emotional state. And you don't have to go for some big old giant hike in the wilderness or drive, an hour and a half away from your house. Literally, you can walk outside your door, walk around your neighborhood, and you are essentially out in nature with the sun and the birds and the wind and plants. Again, try to be as present as mindful as possible. And when you can, keep that cell phone back in your car or in your house. And then gardening and landscaping is a great option to really be in touch with nature, because you're actually in touch with growing something. Soil actually has serotonin, a mood-enhancing brain chemical that's used in antidepressant meds. So just playing in the dirt has proven to be a mood enhancer. And while gardening and landscaping is not an option, obviously during the winter, for those of us that live in a climate that have a winter, houseplants can be the next best thing. And so my house is actually littered with houseplants. So I try to bring as much of nature indoors, if you will, by having all these houseplants that I grow during the course of the year. So 7, move your body, exercise. Any form and amount of exercise will help you physically feel better, and just as importantly, feel better about yourself. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to, all of a sudden become a triathlete to get the benefits of this. As I just said, just 2 20-minute walks a day can be a big difference. If you're able and interested in aerobic exercise, getting your heart rate up for 20 plus minutes a day and sweating a little can be an enormous benefit. The endorphins you get, you've probably heard of the runner's high, but that the endorphins that are released from aerobic exercise actually do help be a mood lifter and help stay with you for 2 or 3 hours during the day. I know when I've been dealing with deep, dark depression, thankfully I've always had the motivation to get to the gym and do my aerobic exercise. I did find that endorphin lift really did lift my depression quite a bit for probably 2 to 4 hours after my workout. Didn't make my depression go away, but it definitely took a significant edge off of it. If you're going to exercise just once per day or get outside just once a day, ideally it would be better in the morning, so you have that under your belt for the rest of the day. But obviously, if you can't do it until after work, then that'll work as well. And number 8, really important, just ignore those critical negative voices inside your head. You've probably seen that bumper sticker that says, "Don't believe everything you think." And I think what's implied there is don't believe everything you think about yourself. It's just really important to tell those voices inside your head that they don't know what they're talking about. They're not real. Those are just things in your head that you're making up about yourself, and that you really just don't need to listen to them. They don't reflect reality, and they don't reflect who you are as a human being. Some things that have been helpful in quieting those voices, helpful for me, that I've been able to adopt is meditation and simple deep breathing techniques can help quiet those voices. You might be familiar with the integrated medicine guru of integrated medicine, Dr. Andrew Weil. Dr. Andrew Weil, who's combined Western medicine with alternative medicine and holistic medicine. He has this breathing technique that I've adopted that he called 4-7-8. And basically it's you inhale on 4 breaths, inhale fairly quickly on 4 counts. You hold your breath for 7 counts, and you release your breath for 8 counts. So you slowly release your breath. And if you can do that 10 times and really focus on your breathing, it can really help immediately reduce your stress level and actually reduce your what's called cortisol levels, which is a brain chemical that is in response to stress. Andrew Weil had everybody in the Lensic Theater here in Santa Fe doing 4-7-8 breathing, but I know I've been in stressful times and actually in meetings and such where I was going crazy with some of the things that were going on in the meeting. And I just tuned out for 30 seconds or 45 seconds and did 10 rounds of 4-7-8 breathing. And as far as meditation goes, I mean, you don't have to become a Zen guru to take advantage of meditation. Even just 5 or 10 minutes of meditation can be really helpful. And I've personally found guided meditation where somebody on tape or DVD or what have you guides you through a meditation scenario, if you will. That works out really well for me. I have trouble meditating just on my own. And I think newcomers to meditation may find guided meditation to be helpful as well. And again, just a little bit, if you just got into a 5 or 10 minute meditation practice a day, I think you could find big benefits to it. And some people like to extend that into half an hour or longer. 9, self-help reading. For those who enjoy reading, there's a lot of really good self-help books out there. I found one, particularly in my struggles with depression, that was really good, called Emotional Sobriety. I'm not sure it would be a great book for someone who doesn't necessarily deal with depression. And then there's a lot of good personal growth, personal journey novels. You might be familiar with Paul Coelho's The Alchemist, Pearl S. Buck's The Good Earth. She wrote back in the 1930s, which is a classic. And it's these novels that are fun because they're a novel. They're not nonfiction, but they basically follow a protagonist or a series of characters that go through a journey in their life and grow as a result of it. And I've found those helpful when I've been struggling. 10, healthy diet. Obviously, we could spend a lot of time on diet, and it's often emphasized and unfortunately often ignored. Sugar has been shown to worsen depression, and so I'm not suggesting people magically transform their diet into this immaculate perfect diet, but it really is important. Obviously, how we're fueling our bodies, what we're putting our mouths and consuming every day, not only affects our physical health, but can dramatically affect our mental health as well. My big issue for years was sugar. I was a soda-aholic. I drank way too many Cokes, and it was even worse because it's that high fructose corn syrup. And luckily, I got sodas out of my diet. I still have a weakness for ice cream, but if you can't, if you're not going to dramatically change your diet, and I'm not suggesting you necessarily go out and do that, try to focus on making sure you get some good healthy grains and fruits and vegetables in your diet, maybe along with some of the stuff that you like to eat that isn't as healthy, because it really will matter with respect to your emotional state. So just another quick word on alcohol and drugs. Alcohol is a depressant. Medical marijuana has a lot of benefits for a lot of people, but it is important to assess what marijuana might be doing with respect to maybe negatively affecting one's mental health. I had a problem with marijuana years ago, and I know it did not do well with my depression. In other words, it made my depression worse, in my opinion. And you need not be an alcoholic or an addict to have alcohol and drug use negatively impair your mental health. And I'm just suggesting you give it some thought and just think about what drugs or alcohol, what role they're playing in your life, and how that might be affecting your happiness. 12, volunteering, being of service to others, I think is extremely important. This is one of my favorite quotes from the Dalai Lama. To make others happy, be compassionate, and to make yourself happy, be compassionate. And so, that's really about that notion of paying it forward, that when you help others in little ways or big ways, that not only does it help them, but it makes you feel good about yourself, that you're actually being of service and offering something of yourself to somebody else because they need it and they need your assistance. And while contributing to nonprofit causes is a great thing, getting out your credit card and making that contribution to a social service agency, it doesn't take the place of having skin in the game. And to the extent that you have some time to to volunteer in one way or another in helping out others, that can be really helpful for your own emotional well-being. And it can be any form of volunteerism. It doesn't have to be in the social service or behavioral health sector. For years, I was an environmental activist, and I felt like I was helping the human condition by working on environmental issues. So volunteerism can take a lot of forms, but it really can play a role in making one feel good about oneself. 13, which is huge, is embrace acceptance. Most of what goes on in the world and much of what happens in our personal lives, unfortunately, we have no control over. And we just have to accept them. And I know that what was a big source of fuel for my depression over the years was the fact that I really have a problem with the oppression of other people and nature and Earth. I really have a problem with the injustices that are going on around the planet, both to disadvantaged peoples and to the planet itself and to Mother Nature. And it had been a big source of fuel for my depression because I could not accept it. I could not just say, Craig, that's just the way it is and you're going to have to accept it. And thankfully, about 10 years ago, I was able to kind of reorient my thinking and said, okay, I accept it. I can embrace acceptance that I'm not going to single-handedly change these things, these injustices, and maybe they won't change at all, and I just have to accept that. And that's true also in our own individual lives, our own situation, that there may be things in our history that we regret, that we wish we had handled differently with other people or with a job opportunity or what have you, that we regret and wish, we hadn't handled the way we did. But we need to realize that the past is history and that we can't change things we did in the past that maybe we wish we had done differently. And we just have to accept that and move on. This is not to downplay those who have had severe trauma in their lives and probably will always have to process that trauma and will never understandably be able to fully move on from that. And I do want to really recognize and emphasize that acceptance does not mean apathy or complacency. It doesn't mean that you've stopped caring about things that have been upsetting you, or that you even don't want to do anything about it or feel like you can't. It doesn't mean that. It just means that in order to keep it from burning yourself up inside, you have to accept that you're not going to single-handedly change these things, and they're going to probably be the way they are. And then next, embrace gratitude. It's pretty normal for us to focus on the negative aspects of our lives, the things that aren't going right, the things that we wish were happening differently. And it is important. And the therapists are pretty prone to having you make a gratitude list. And it is important to make a gratitude list periodically and just look at the good things in your life, however big or small. If you've got a roof over your head, or you have a job, or you at least have some health care, or you have a family and some friends that love you, it's important to sort of really stay connected to. And this is part about staying connected to yourself, understanding that there's some really good stuff going on in your life that it's important to not take for granted and embrace. And so that's gratitude. Okay, so now we've got another Insta poll. Which one of the following strategies do you think you most might want to focus on in improving your mental health and your happiness? Getting out of the house more in general, exercise, being outside in nature, improving your diet, reducing your device time, interacting with others, or exploring and strengthening your religion.
So we've got that poll launched, and got a little over half of you that have voted. So we're going to leave it open for maybe another 30 seconds and we'll share the results. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share those results now.
Okay, some interesting results on the poll. Looks like by far 32% said they'd like to focus more on exercise. That's a great thing. And again, don't feel like you have to become an accomplished athlete like from the get-go. Start off slowly and be happy with your progress along the way. I'm terribly missing my gym. I'm kind of a gym rat, and while my gym's open, I haven't felt comfortable going back to my gym yet indoors. But boy, I sure do miss it, and sure do miss my gym friends. So exercise is a big one. That's good. Next is reduce device time, news intake, and time in social media. I'm glad to see that relatively high, and that's compelling for over 1 in 5 of you. I do think it's important, and I do think it's really, really difficult to do that, but not impossible. But our culture and our society is so built around our devices that we're sort of expected to be at the end of the string and answer our emails and our text messages on a moment's notice. And I just don't think that's real healthy for us. So that's neat to see. Interacting more with others is almost 1 in 5, 18%. Extremely important. And let's see what's next. And the rest were improved diet, about 1 in 10. That's great. And then 4% on religion and just 4% on getting out of the house. Getting out of the house is pretty much covered, I think, by the being outside more and some of the others. All right, that was fascinating, and good luck to all of you in pursuing these things. Just about wrapping up here. So go to the Q&A. Behave. And it's not, it's locked up. Why are you locked up?
I think you just need to click on the screen and it should.
That's what I'm doing, and it's just locked. Oh, here we go. Okay. It's cranky. So I've just got this section in here for those that deal with depression. I'm sure many of you as school nurses and as counselors and therapists deal with your students, and some of them are dealing with depression. And I just like to emphasize the importance of individual therapy. It helps, it works. It's really important to be completely honest with your therapist. And I share that specifically because my story is that about 10 years ago, my depression got the worst it's ever been. I was very suicidal. Thankfully, never attempted it, but I was thinking about suicide all the time. And when my psychiatrist and my therapist would ask me if I was suicidal, I lied. I said no. I was so ashamed of being suicidal, of not wanting to be alive anymore, that I didn't even tell my mental health professionals who I was paying to get better. And so how could they help me when I wasn't even being honest about the fact that I was thinking about suicide all the time? So, so extremely important to be honest with your therapist. And they're not your friends. They're not meant to be your friends. If you're not clicking with your therapist, find another, because it's important to click and have a good rapport with your therapist. 16, group therapy. I'm a huge fan and supporter of group therapy. And that's where, 8 to 10 to 12 people get together in a group setting, and there's usually a licensed therapist who facilitates the group. And basically it's like individual therapy, but it's people sharing their own stories of struggling in recovery, and also then providing feedback to their peers in recovery. And I found it to be dynamic and powerful in a way that's quite different than individual therapy. And others benefit from your story and feedback, and you benefit from theirs. It can be really powerful to know that you're not alone in these struggles if you're struggling with anxiety or PTSD or depression or bipolar. And that's because that's what it feels like when you have a mental illness. It kind of feels like you're the only one in the world dealing with something like this, which of course you're not. And the nice thing about group therapy is that confidentiality is pledged and is sacrosanct. It's very, very, very much respected. And then again, for those who are dealing with depression and taking little steps to hang in there, just praise yourself and do what you can to feel good about the measures you're taking during your struggle. And then just a quick word about antidepressant meds, because I've been around the block with antidepressant meds. It's a very personal decision. I would research them before you dive into them. I personally recommend, if someone's dealing with depression and are thinking about wanting to try an antidepressant med, that they consult a psychiatrist who has a medical specialty in the meds, rather than just going to the primary care physician and getting some generic prescription for Prozac or what have you. I have personally found antidepressant meds, particularly when my depression has been really bad, to be quite helpful. Less so when my depression's kind of in that mild to moderate land. So here are our learning objectives again. Hopefully we accomplished them. That was the idea. And again, I want to focus on the personal objective, and that is if you could make a personal commitment to yourself to taking 1 or 2 measures new to you, or at least somewhat new to you, to help hang in there and help boost your mental health immune system, that would be a great outcome of this webinar, in my opinion. And just a few more closing thoughts, and then we'll do a little Q&A. Pets and animals, connecting with nature. So for those people who have a dog or a cat or any pets, I mean, that's a form of really bringing nature into your home and actually living with another animal that's not a human. And some of you who are horse people, equine therapy with horses, there's something about the energy that horses have that have been very beneficial for people who struggling actually with severe mental illnesses. When I did a 30-day inpatient program 10 years ago for my depression, we did equine therapy, and I thought it was going to be totally silly, and I really got a lot out of it. And so that's my dog, Lobo. Lobo rescued me from the animal shelter back in March. I knew that lockdown was coming, and I'm a big dog person, but was in between dogs, as we say. And so I went and got Lobo, and I live by myself, and I'm retired, so I'm not connected to a work social environment. So there's a reason we called him companion animals, because he's been a great benefit to me during all of this, and particularly for people who do live alone. To the extent that they like having a dog or a cat, it can be really helpful to have a pet, a companion animal like that with you in the home. Sleep is not to be underestimated, very similar to diet. Studies have shown that unfortunately a lot of us in our culture really have really poor quality sleep. And sleep and diet are extremely important, and we tend to overlook them. And sleep can be critical for both physical and mental health. And so it's really important to try to do what you can to get in a good night's sleep. And studies have shown that if you can shut down your device at least a half an hour before going to bed, get off of your device. I mean, so many of us, I know sometimes I fall asleep, looking at my little smartphone and my emails or my, websites or what have you. And then if you can make your bedroom as dark as possible, they've found that to be extremely important, having it dark. And then if you're a little bit on the older side, if you're 50 and above, I found out that I had sleep apnea. and sleep apnea can go undetected for years and really disrupt your sleep. And they have these take-home sleep analysis that can be helpful. So with that, I want to conclude. I want to thank you for having me be, I guess, the first presenter of the conference this week. I wish you all well. I wish you all happiness. We all deserve to be happy. And I thank you for the critical physical and mental health and behavioral health services you all provide to our youth out there in K through 12 land. I really admire the work you do and the fact that you're on the front line of affecting the well-being of our children in our state. I covered a lot. I'm retired. I have a fair amount of time on my hands. If there's anything you want to contact me about, feel free to email me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this topic. It makes me feel really good that I can share at least my insight with what I've found helpful in maintaining my own mental health. And hopefully today you found some of this helpful as well. And I'll turn it back over to Alicia. And Alicia, I don't know if you already have any questions or things that I should be responding to, or we can open it up at this point.